want to talk about issues in mathematics education that relate to identity and agency and positionality as well as competency. And so when I think about identity, one of the things, and particularly mathematical identity is how students see themselves as knowers and doers of mathematics. And I want to connect this to a theory called situated identity mediated theory, or situated mediated identity theory, rather. And our identities are situated in context. And so when we think about mathematical identity, it is the context in which we think about mathematics instruction and how students see themselves in mathematics, and particularly in mathematics classrooms. And so what are the structures in our mathematics classroom that allow students to see themselves as doers of mathematics? This might mean that we think about practices that we engage. And so we can think about our practices as they relate to mathematical discourse, which means thinking about who do we pose questions to and who does not get questions posed to them. Because too often, those who are heard are positioned as being competent. And so how do we create a broader space so that more students are heard in our mathematics classroom? And so it might be thinking intentionally and purposely about some instructional routines in which we engage. So oftentimes I engage in the practice of dyads. I use an instructional routine around dyads where each student or all students get a chance to talk and all students get a chance to listen. And so everyone is heard in that case and using dyads. So we can work on problems, and then one person can be a talker, one person can be the listener, and the talker might describe their instructional strategy. And the listener is listening but not responding verbally. They're simply listening. And they're not evaluating. The role is to just listen to how one engages in that practice or how the strategies that they are using. And then we can reverse those roles so that everyone has an opportunity to talk and listen. So this is where I think competency, when we think about mathematical competency, I want to push this definition away from rightness and wrongness of solution, but rather competency is about being participatory. And how do we broaden the space of being participatory? So I borrow from my colleague Amanda Jansen at the University of Delaware, where she uses this work around rough draft talk. And Mandy's work on rough draft talk is significant for the work that I do. And so rough draft talk is just what it sounds like. And so oftentimes I pair students up in small groups or in pairs where they engage in rough draft talk around a problem or a task that they're engaging in. And I use the term rough draft talk because it implies that your ideas are not fully developing or fully developed, that your ideas are under construction. You can change. Just like a rough draft paper, it is up for revision. And so this is where students bring their rough draft talk together to revise one another's thinking and engaging in the practice of reducing this idea that competency is about right or wrong, but competency is about sharing one's ideas. And so rough draft talk lessens the threat of being wrong. It actually broadens the space of just being participatory. And so when students are less threatened by having a wrong answer and more about, this is how I thought about it, it really supports this idea of a broad engagement. And so knowers and doers of mathematics, this is how it impacts mathematical identity. So now all students are being participatory. And when we're participatory, we engage in the practices that we want students to participate in. And agency is about those behaviors. So when I see myself as a doer of mathematics, I engage in behaviors that doers of mathematics engage in. And so the sense of agency, I have a sense of agency. Now that I know I see myself as a doer, I want to engage in those practices. So I engage in discourse, I engage in problem solving, I engage in reasoning. And so it is thinking about our instructional practices that supports these ideas of how students see themselves. So I mentioned dyads, I mentioned rough draft talk. Another strategy that I use is one sheet, two drafts. and I give students a large sheet of paper. We engage in a task, and they split it in half. And one student's working on one side, and the other student's working on the other side. And they're solving the problem, they're engaging in talk, but they're doing their work. They can have a sense of collaboration around the work, or they just can work on the work and then they can have a discussion afterwards. But they're working on the same sheet. And working on the same sheet, what I found working with kids who do that there are different ways that students engage. One way that a pair of students may do their task first, and then negotiate it after they've done the task. Another, they negotiate while they're solving or working through the task. But nonetheless, they're engaging in the mathematics. And so I think of those three strategies that supports identity, because it supports students being doers of mathematics. It supports agency, because students have a sense of agency as they engage in those behaviors that mathematicians engage in, and it supports competency. So competency, if we think of it as being participatory rather than based on rightness or wrongness, it supports competency because all students can see themselves as being competent in the space of mathematics.